This is Steve.
And this is Sean.
This is Acro Media's High Five.
So, Steve, what are we going to talk about?
We're going to be talking about stability in websites. Well, Drupal websites.
Not like emotional stability?
No, because I don't think we are...
We would be terrible. We should never talk about that.
Yeah, we're not authorized to talk
Don't
about
take
that.
our advice
We
on
are
that.
authorized to talk about website stability, though.
Yes. That's
Specifically
what we're good
you. And I'm just going to support you in this conversation.
Emotionally, yes.
Emotionally support you in this conversation. So we were talking a little bit, prior to this episode, and you were educating me on stability, and I was a little bit confused as to think that, stability came from the website staying up online. But you had mentioned that it goes way deeper than that. It goes deeper to the point of, you had made the example that, hey, we're doing this migration, or we have this import. If you click this button or do this thing, the import will blow up. Well, why does it exist then if it can blow up? So maybe you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so stability is not just that it stays up, because we hope it should anyways, and that's pretty standard. What can we do to sort of remove, fragility or things that could cause it to not stay up or make it more prone to failure? And so things are like that. If there's a certain combination of options that you can do that is bad and you should never do them, why is it possible to do them, right? We should remove that. Or sometimes you'll have a thing where you just put an error message that says, like, never do this. And it's like, why do you have a button that says don't push the button, right? Like,
I'll push that button.
Remove. So everyone, and people forget those things, and they'll think if you should only be able to do things that are safe, right? Or very occasionally some sort of power functions that are safe, but it's just like, hey, warning, this is powerful. You're meant to use it this way, but just, hey, you're changing all the products. Be aware of that. So you should at least do that, but you should probably remove, most of them, right? Or it's like, oh, hey, if you do this, then this won't sync right, and you have to do this one first and then that one second. Why am I even allowed to do the second one first then? I should remove that.
So what are some of these rules that we should be following, or why are we even talking about stability today?
It comes down to you want to keep your site up, but it's more than just like my hosting should be good and things like that. And people don't really go past that necessarily. It's stuff like you should also build stability in code so that, like, if I build this piece of code and someone changes this other piece to have the variable be a different name, this shouldn't blow up, right? You should have things like that, so you don't have sort of traps in there where it's like, this works right now, but if anyone changes this stuff, it will suddenly not work again.
And when you come across one of those things, like, click here and it blows up, what do you do? Is it as simple as just removing that obstacle, or how do you diagnose that?
It can be various things. It could be just remove that option so that it can't be done. In this case, check and be like, oh, if the parameters aren't met and this will blow up, don't show this. It could be like, oh, that actually shouldn't blow up, so we should fix that, right? Or we should make it just be like, hey, here's an error, this is not going to work, versus like the site crashes or something like that. There's all kinds of various ways. Or you can have it just, it might be like, okay, here's the 10 parameters we normally go, and the code works with those. Just have some simple extra things to be like, if it is these different parameters, it will work, or it will fail gracefully, where it will just say, hey, that's not a valid one, and it won't explode. Or you have another instance can be like, hey, if I run like import 100 products, it will be fine. But if I import 1,000 products, it will lock up and everything will crash. It's like,
okay, well, you got to address that then.
Yeah, and if you're like, oh, well, we only have 100 products, it's like, but are we never, ever going to have more than them? Because now you get caught by this thing by surprise, which is much worse, because then 2 years later, the client adds some more products and they try to do something that, for all indications, should work. They're not doing anything wrong, boom, and it blows up. And it's like you kind of put that time bomb in there, right? Because you knew there was something that wouldn't work that could happen. And it's like, so you should either say, please, you should literally lock it down and be like, hey, we cannot import more than 100. Please, decrease your file size or whatever. Or, you should have it work for that. And that can be in a lot of different things, subtly within the code. It can just be like little bits of, they'll refer to stuff like hard coding. And so that would be like, hey, we connect to this API, but the API address is built right into the code. And it's like, oh, well, that's probably good. And then in a year, they update it and they change it. And it's like, okay, well, now we have to update the whole module. Maybe we should have just made that a setting so that it could be changed.
This is
all those little things that make it run smoother. But you can launch something successfully without doing those, because at the time it's fine.
I've probably heard that the most out of things that are, have failed or are prone to failure is like, well, that's hard coded. And I guess that's one of the things.
Yeah, and kind of the thing is like, well, you asshole, like you knew that this was bad, and you basically just delayed it to someone else. You said, like, it's not my problem, it's future me's or future someone else's problem, right? But it's been a problem since the get-go. And that gets used as an excuse a lot, too. It's like, oh, well, you shouldn't have done that because that breaks. And it's like, why is there the option to do that, right?
Likely that does decrease emotional stability as well.
Probably for everyone, the client included or whatever. The problem is clients will sometimes feel bad and they'll be like, "Oh, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do that. I'm sorry."
Yeah.
It's not really their fault. They shouldn't have to know whether they can or can't do things. The software. It's like a car. You used to be able to just redline your car and just blow up the engine or whatever. And then they were like, "Well, we should just stop people from being able to do that." And you just limit it. You can only rev this far.
Yeah.
And you can't explode it, right? So people don't have to know like, rev it, but only this much, and that kind of thing. It's like, well, why don't we just not let them do a thing that will cause it to be ruined? But software gets done a lot, and they're just like, do whatever you want, right? Oh, well, this exploded? Oh, quite probably.
Yeah, quite probably.
Yeah.
So as an agency, what would we be doing as a best practice? If a client came to us and they were having these issues overall, maybe a previous vendor had done some things that are a little wonky, or we're just looking to maintain a current client site. How do we dig in and see if this site is stable?
There's a few things. The most obvious one is test failure cases.
Okay.
Don't test when it's good, test when it's bad, right? So even with automated testing or just manual testing or whatever, say like, okay, this is supposed to get a value between 1 and 10 or whatever, for a very simplistic example. Send it 100, send it H. Send it nothing, right? Like what happens there? Does it explode? Does it work fine or whatever? Test those kind of setups. It can also be done a lot by architecture and looking in the code. If you're a more experienced developer, you can say, okay, I see this and it's clearly not going to expand in this area. And it's all those little things of just gating what you can have. It's like, okay, I built this function, but it can only, it has a product, but the product needs to have a UPC code attached to it. So don't just assume that we get one passed in with the UPC. Check and require it and throw an exception if we do it. So then if someone else tries to use that function with a different type of product, they put that through and then they go, and then it's going to error them and be like, you need a UPC code. And they're like, okay, I can understand that. Whereas if they put it through and it just crashes and doesn't work, now they don't know that maybe they don't see the crash right away, or even it happens and they don't know how to fix it and stuff. So
it sounds like you're using a use case. And then based off that use case, you're looking at all the fail points in that use case, and you're deliberately trying to create those failures so that they can't exist in the future.
Yeah. And you try to be, somewhat generic, so you're not thinking of 100 fail cases. You're more thinking of like, okay,
the ones that are plausible.
These are my,
right?
but you're also thinking of sort of like, these are my 4 successes. So anything that's not these, I should kind of have at least a generic sort of catch-all or a few specific things to handle those, because that's a little bit of a better way to think about it. Because if you try to think of every failure, that's maybe bad, but you think of, this is good, anything that's not this is bad, and I should handle that appropriately. But it's also not just with, data that gets passed through it. It can be, ways of using stuff. It's like, I can put this in here and it will cache fine, but if I put this in, then that's actually bad and it will cache wrong. And it's like, okay, well, do that part, set it up so that it will cache right.
Yeah.
And don't leave this thing in, even though it's not a problem right now. You're setting a booby trap for someone else, right? So make that. It can get really complicated when it sort of goes into programming, but it's like, it's always that sort of, usually programmers even know about them, right? It's not like, you never saw them, but you're just like, that wouldn't happen. And you just leave it, right?
I have kind of got that feeling too, right? Obviously at the start of the episode, my version of what I thought stability was a little bit different than what we've kind of uncovered. But like I even said, that idea of like, oh, that's hard coded, or when I was training the client on how to use their site, I really made sure to tell them to avoid this area. And, you hear those things, and my reaction generally is like,
you go think about that for a second.
Right. It's like so you have to avoid that area, or I gave them admin access, but I made sure that they didn't have access to this area where they could blow up their site. And that's actually more common than it really should be.
It's very common. And it shouldn't almost ever be there. It should just be dummy proof. And the problem is it happens a lot in computers, so it makes people oftentimes like being good with computers just means willing to go click any of the buttons. And being bad with computers is just like you're too timid because you're like, oh, it might wreck something. And the problem is you kind of be conditioned because it might wreck something or whatever. Like that does happen occasionally. Less and less, better software and stuff and everything like on a modern operating system. Almost all the options are safe, and the ones that are dangerous are like, really well, like, hey, you're going to delete your whole system. Like, are you really, really sure you want to do this? Please confirm 4 times, and it's not in like a place you'll stumble on accidentally and stuff. But
Fair enough.
It happens. And so a lot of that is bad UX is making people timid and stuff like that about what can they do. Maybe this will blow stuff up. It should be like, use whatever you see. It's all safe kind of thing.
So we've covered a lot. Can you give us a too long didn't read?
You shouldn't build your code with little time bombs in them for future you.
Especially not intentional time bombs.
Yes, ones where you go, that will be bad when if this ever happens, but hopefully it won't, right? Like,
so make your website stable. Questions, comments, anything regarding stability, please do so below.
Also, you can check out our blog on acromedia.com. You can follow us on Facebook, and you can check me out on Twitter. This is the part where we're done now, Mark.